I want to first thank you very much for
Mhm.
volunteering your time to be part of these wetland interviews that we do as part of SWS activities with the webinar committee. So thank you very much for your time and your willingness to come on this morning. I do have some questions that I typically would ask, but I believe you and I
Mhm.
were going to just discuss some things that you might want to talk about on this interview. So this is Roy Massaros. I'm the host, and I'm interviewing Nancy Lynn this morning. You did send me your resume, but maybe you could go ahead and give us a couple of highlights of what your current work activities are in addition to your responsibilities with SWS. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we start some questions and answers.
Oh, well, I I just recently retired last year as the outreach and education training lead for the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection's Division of Wetlands and Waterways. And I went immediately into my volunteer job, which feels just as very substantive and even more so in some ways as the president of the Society of Wetland Scientists Professional Certification Program. And it's been a wonderful experience, and I'll share some of that and my journey to getting here, which I really think is relatable for some folks out there, and I hope to share that.
Okay, so thank you for your self introduction. I do have questions I normally would like to ask about how you got interested in wetlands, and ultimately what I try to do when I do these wetland interviews is to inspire the next generation and motivate folks that have interest in wetlands as a career, if not
Mhm.
already, maybe to pursue something like that. So my questions are typically asking about your path to get where you are today, your background, and things of that sort. But before we take time, because we're only supposed to be on for about 30 minutes, before we take time for any of that, I don't know if you'd want to just take us through what your current thoughts are and tell us a little bit more about your background leading to where you are now and some things that you may have on your own agenda that you'd like to talk about. If I framed it that way, is that okay? Can you work with
Uh,
that a little bit?
sure, sure. So it's really interesting. I think that I have probably a background. I have an immigrant story to share with people because as I look back on my life, I've come to realize that my fascination with wetlands started at a very early age. And it really informed and guided me in the direction that I've been going. So I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, and I lived there until I was 5 years old. And I emigrated with my family to the US. And it was interesting because my mom was a high school biology teacher, and she was the first girl in her family to get a college education. And because of that, she really instilled in me, by examples, the sense of curiosity and of the natural world. And just as importantly, the joy of sharing what you know with others. And that has been kind of my motivation, my love for the environment and the natural world and wetlands in particular, and my desire to really help others understand that in a very fundamental way. So some of my fondest memories in Taiwan were visiting my grandparents because they had wetlands and ponds in their backyard. You see, my mom, my brother, and I lived in a third floor apartment in Taipei City. And in the summer, it was sweltering. And it was such a great respite and relief to go to a mom and a gong's home out in the more on green areas of the city. So when I first came to the US, I joined my dad, who was finishing graduate school, and it was a really tough transition. I didn't know English or the culture. And at times I faced prejudice since I would be the only Asian kid in my class. My solace again was a wetland. I was so lucky that there was this little creek at the end of my street in suburban Philadelphia. I would spend days when I was not in school catching and releasing crayfish, turtles, scooping little minnows and insects and putting them back under the rocks and watching them float away in the water. And as a child of the 70s, right after the creation of EPA, I participated in the first Earth Day marches, Arbor Day celebrations, and I thought maybe I had found my purpose and people. So when I went to college and tried a couple of majors before I decided on environmental science, and as I recall, there really wasn't a clear path for an environmental career, but I decided that I would try to find an environmental job afterwards anyway. And I remember being such a great disappointment to my mom. She was never one to mince words. Since I was the eldest and the only daughter of 5 kids, I told her that I had decided to do environmental work. And she'd say, and she responded and said, "Ah, what is that? You're just as smart as your brothers, and they're going to medical school. Why don't you want to be a doctor like them?" So it's funny to me that she never really fully understood that she was the person who inspired me. Anyway, I did get an environmental job as a naturalist instructor at a national environmental landmark, High Rock Park Conservation Center in Staten Island, New York. And I got, and then I got a job at the New York City Parks Department as one of the early urban park rangers that emulated the National Park Service Ranger Program. The program was created by Gordon Davis, the first Black Parks Commissioner under Ed Koch, and to help clean up the deteriorating city park system and to make it safe and encourage people to come visit through educational activities and our presence. The borough of Staten Island had many parks where I worked that included coastal and inland wetlands and the second largest contiguous public parkland in the city. Eventually, I oversaw the city's, the island's environmental interpretive program. And when my husband went to graduate school for his PhD in environmental toxicology at Harvard, I moved with him and got a job as the City of Cambridge's first Conservation Commission director. That was the beginning of my wetlands regulatory career.
And approximately what year was that?
That was in 1984. So it was a long time ago in a decade far, far away.
So that was postgraduate, postgraduate degree.
Yes, post-college. Yep. And it was a really interesting and great job because it really was a segue to my work at DEP that I've been, and the job that I really had been in for about almost 4 decades.
So normally I ask questions, but I just want to give some colors to my personal background because it does in many ways relates very much to yours. Other than I was born and raised, grew up in New Jersey, but at age 4.5, I was living someplace where I had these waters and ponds. I didn't know they were wetlands at the time, but everything that you said that you did, that's exactly what I was doing when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. And I was just curious as you were and continued to explore. And when it was time to go to college, didn't have much interest in high school because I wanted to come home and play in the woods and where these wetland areas were. But when I went to college, that's when I really started pursuing science, biology, etc. But your background very much relates to my background growing up and everything that motivated me and interested me as well. So I'm sorry to throw in a little color about myself, but please continue with what you were chatting about, if you will.
Absolutely, Roy. I really actually think that being a free range kid during that time for me was so important. And I do think that it's important for parents these days to allow some level of free ranging for their kids, because it is how you connect. It's how you deeply connect to the environment. And if you don't do that, you won't understand and want to protect it. It seems like a very simple concept, but I do think that there are neurological wires that occur when you're outside. Well, I do know that actually. So what you say, I think will resonate for so many of us who are wetland scientists today.
Right. Did your mother ever pivot and come to appreciate your terrific career and the path that you took to get to where you are?
Yeah,
A paradigm
actually,
shift, if you will, because yeah, I had the thought to myself when I was undergrad, do I want to take care of people that aren't healthy or the environment that's not healthy? And I decided that I wanted to spend my career looking at ways to help the environment get healthier. And I think
yeah,
that's exactly, resonates with what you did and other wetland scientists are doing.
yeah,
It's just that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, my mother did pivot. It was actually interesting because it was close to the end of her life. She passed away in 2020.
Oh,
Not because of
sorry.
COVID, but she was very ill. She was bedbound, and 3 years before that, she had suffered a number of strokes. But when she could speak, she said, "Nancy, I think you did good with the wetland environmental job you chose. I'm really proud of you." And it was just this huge, moment, deeply moving for me. In a way, no matter what you say, that, well, you have to stick to what you believe in, what you want to do.
Right.
Your parents, and I know for my parents, they really sacrificed a lot for me to do the work that I did. And in some ways, I know that because I devoted my life to public service, it was one of those aspects for them that they thought, well, you're doing good, but, are you going to make a living? And that they worried about that. As immigrants, they always worry. I think many immigrant, and I think all parents worry about their child being able to make a living in something
Right.
that like
Sure.
like inspires them and motivates them and drives them.
So
So
true. Yes, it is. Of course.
yeah, yeah. So I did have a circuitous route getting to DEP. I did work at the Cambridge Conservation Commission. That was my first wetlands regulatory job. And would you like me to speak a little bit more about that and how that led me to DEP?
Yes, you're terrific to be on a call interviewing with because you are, some people are, I've done these before, and you don't always get such good commentary and interaction with who you're interviewing, but you're
Mhm.
doing you don't even need me, so you're doing fine.
Oh,
So one of the things that I would normally like to ask is, challenges that you've had, things that
mhm.
had a very long history, of course, career.
Right.
Highlight some things that maybe were challenges for you and how you overcame those challenges. Those are typical kinds of questions that I like to ask because then folks may be able to relate to that or think
Mhm.
about it when they're pursuing a career and when they hit challenges and how you overcome maybe some of the more critical challenges that you had in your career. Is that what you were going to share with us next in that
Yes,
light?
yes,
Okay.
I would. But the thing is, like, I think the challenges, there are common threads that many of us who are not, um, who who have to change and transition our whole lives. And for me, it was immigrating to the US and learning English and learning the cultural things that affect affect the way you do things.
Right.
And I think, and I think maybe some of my Asian colleagues out there who are listening this little part will resonate. One of the things, and I wasn't actually going to talk about it, but I'm thinking that it's important to share that, is that
Okay.
as a Chinese, as an Asian, part of what you're taught when you're culturally is that you minimize your accomplishments. You don't bring attention to yourself. It is just counter cultural intuitive to do that. And yet
Okay.
the work that I did and was doing required that I bring attention to myself, because I am the vehicle for information, understanding, and change. So it was
Right.
really hard for me. And even to this day, it's hard to feel like, what is the distinction between doing your job, doing what really is who you are, and being braggy about it. I wasn't even going to say that, and yet I feel like it's important to understand that to be yourself is okay, and to use your tools and your voice is okay. But there has to be that underlying feeling of you have to be humble, because all that you do is built on the work of others and the
Yeah.
things that you've learned from others, from your teachers, from your mentors. And it's been this driving thing, because I actually can visualize the people that have helped me along the way. Many of them have passed, but I am so very grateful to them. So anyway, that is.
So then, a question that comes up is, what do you do now, or have you done in your career, where you're sharing that? And I know the answer to the question, because I know your position now with SWS, but
Mhm.
giving back, and how you now mentor, or in the recent years, how you've mentored to help educate and share your knowledge. Do you have any good examples of how you've accomplished that?
Well, okay, I'm going to share a list with you, because I actually have thought about it a while, and I thought, a lot of what I've learned is actually, and you think about, okay, how do you interpret wetland science and the regulations? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? Because I work for the Mass Department. I worked for the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, and I realized that I've learned a lot from my earlier work as a educator, as an environmental interpreter, as a naturalist.
Okay.
And it's not and it's very transferable to anyone who's like trying to reach and get out there to explain sometimes very complex information like wetland science. So I'm going to go through the list, and Roy, you can stop me or pause and say, Nancy, can you please clarify that?
Okay.
Okay, so I always start when I'm going out there. I always start from the vantage point that your goal is to be helpful. And I remind myself, because I have chosen the job of being a public servant. That was what I always wanted to do. So my
Okay.
job is to serve. And I really realized that, I needed to be truthful and honest and authentic in everything I relay to the public and to people I'm trying to explain sometimes very complex information to. And I also learned that, you got to listen, and you got to pause, and you really don't you really don't need to be the person who's talking all the time, because you really need to give your audience the time and space to speak. And you don't want to dominate the conversation or discussion or during the Q&A.
Right.
I also realized, and this is something I learned later on, that you should chunk information to keep it simple. And you should try, but yet you should strive to be accurate and state the facts. Use all your tools like storytelling, analogies, or examples that people can relate to. So that goes back to really knowing your audience, paying attention to who your audience is. So that means you got to do your homework and understand who they are and what motivates them, what worries them. And that information, and if the information isn't clear that you're relating to, then at least ask so that you can express your sincere interest in what they are getting from you, what they need for you to clarify. And I've really learned to remember that when you're dealing with confrontation, which I have in many, many times in my career, that it's not personal. And yet you have to stand firm and be as neutral as possible. Don't incite argument. Remember to let people know that you're truly paying attention, you're present, and you're actually listening to them. So in a way, there's this life coach, Mel Robbins, who says, let them. Just let them voice out their worries. Let them voice out their anger. Let them voice out their concern. And stand firm, be neutral, and yet try to address some of that through sincerity. I think the other thing that I've really learned is pay attention. Let's look for visual cues in the audience. And if you see that they're disengaging, you'll know it. They're tapping their fingers and their feet, and they just want you to move on. And if that's the case, sometimes you just need to take a break, give them time to stretch. And the other thing is I've learned to gear to different learning styles. People, and this is something that comes from neuroscience, is that people learn in different ways in their cortex, in their brain. There's a section that's the visual cortex. There's a section that focuses on the audio, and there's other section in your cortex that actually deals with action, right? So by engaging all of those three, it's the most effective way of communicating.
Okay.
And yeah, I think those are really the basics. And I've learned that those are very successful, were very successful for me in my work. Oh, and the other thing is, you know what? Seek help from others who are experts in your field, others who know information. Because when you ask, you're showing that you recognize their unique skill set and that you appreciate it. And when they ask for a favor from you, try really hard to return that favor. And that's how you build community. That's how you build credibility. And that's how you build respect for one another.
True. What have you had a list that you were looking at? Because I don't want to move on to another question if you have.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's really it.
Oh, that was quite a bit, but one of the things, and I've choice of words carefully here, what highlights of your career are you most proud of?
Oh.
Notice I'm being careful. I was going to save this to the end. that that you can brag about. I didn't want to use that word brag, so I was being careful not to use that word, but I just used it. Highlights
That
of
is
your career that you're most proud of.
oh my goodness. Well, I guess I'm most proud of creating the Wetland Circuit Rider program that I did in 1995. And what I did was I started this program to respond to the conservation commissions. You see, in Massachusetts, wetlands permitting and regulations starts with the local conservation commissioners. There are 351 volunteer conservation commissions in Massachusetts, and they are the folks that are appointed by the either the select board or mayor of a municipality to do wetlands permitting. And then we at DEP oversee any appeals to their decision. So one of the things we realized we needed to do is that conservation commissioners, the makeup of conservation commissioners had very, very technical and regulatory knowledge and skills. So through a survey that was actually funded by an EPA Wetlands Program Development Grant, we found out that what they really asked for was, we need people to get out there and to give us information in person so that we can ask the tailored questions that we have, the issues that we have, to someone who is knowledgeable and helpful. So I created the Wetland Circuit Rider program as a pilot program in 1995 to respond to that request. And it was so successful that during the implementation of a new law that was added to the Rivers Protection Act, that was added to the Wetlands Protection Act, which, by the way, Massachusetts was the first country to enact a law that combined wetlands and coastal protection of wetlands in coastal and inland areas. When they added the protection of rivers, the state senator at the time incorporated this idea into a statewide wetlands approach and provided funding for it. And we have had this program for all since, and it still continues today, even since I've left DEP. And it's been emulated, this idea has been emulated in other states, in other regions. And it's not always on wetlands, but it's the same idea. And it's based on the idea that also, you know, it's the concept that there were circuit riders, like circuit rider judges of old, and they would gallop on horse from town to town to provide judgment or provide help and resources. So these are our circuit riders. They go from town to town and work with every community to help them with the regulatory and technical assistance that they specifically need. So that was one of the things I was really proud of, and I was really proud of. So we did a lot of training, soils, adding soils to the wetlands delineation methodology in Massachusetts was actually very challenging because, again, conservation commissioners are volunteers and they have variable technical skills. And so I was able to gather the federal agencies and state staff together to be trainers. And I got another Wetlands Program Development Grant. Thank you, EPA. So grateful for that, to get supplies and funds and training facilities. And I got Ralph Tyner and Peter Veneman from UMass Amherst to develop or update their Hydric Soils of New England book. And we had it printed and distributed to every conservation commissioner in the state. And we also bought Munsell colored books for every conservation commissioner in the state. And in our recent wetland delineation last year before I retired, I saw some commissioners open up the same book that said, you know, courtesy of Mass DEP on it. I thought, oh my goodness, they're still using it. That's wonderful. That's really wonderful.
Must be very gratifying to
It
see.
was very gratifying. And I've received some awards, the Outstanding Public Service Award by the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commission, which is the nonprofit group that represents all the conservation commissions. The Educator of the Year Award for the Network of Social Justice. And prior to my retirement, the MACC, or the Mass Association of Conservation Commissions, awarded me the Lifetime Achievement Award for outstanding natural resource protection. And that was really special to me because that was the award from my peers and from the commissions that I have valued so much in my work. And yeah, that was just super.
I can see that would be very gratifying to receive that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I am a resident my entire life of New Jersey. I see with development, overdevelopment in New Jersey, what's happening. We appreciate wetlands so much. I cringe every time I see something else being developed. I want to ask, with your experience at DP in Massachusetts, are you comfortable with the trajectory that Massachusetts seems to be on for its preservation, conservation, and value for wetlands?
So you're talking about regulatory, or are you talking about the overall picture?
Well, both. The overall picture, because we have a limited time on these interviews, but
yeah.
Regulatory. And like DEP, New Jersey DEP has nice regulations. I don't know why we still continue to develop. We don't seem to want to hold back any development. And I get that whole story that the property owner wants to be able to get value from their property, but it just is disturbing to me as we lose more and more wetlands, despite our society's effort. Society of Wetland Scientists, that society I'm talking about, how much we value wetlands in New Jersey. I just feel as though, and globally, we know factually that wetlands continue to slip away. So that's why I want to ask that question, because you've been very involved in Massachusetts, the trajectory that you feel as though your state seems to be on at this juncture.
So Massachusetts has been really progressive in the work of wetlands protection. There's been a movement to now create a kind of like to really, really forward wetlands restoration. And there's been other agencies in the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, in their Division of Ecological Restoration, that has been dealing with restoration on a huge scale. And I do think that, and this is my personal perspective, is that we need to up the ante with restoration, that we need to stand firm on the protection, and that can be very, very, very difficult and confrontational at times. But overall, I think that we're going in a good way, but we really need the collective efforts of more than one agency, one group. We really need to really up the ante on this, because we are losing wetlands at a substantial clip. And it's just like the death in pieces, losing wetlands in pieces, that you need vast swaths of protection. So it has to be combined with more than just restoration, but basically outright protection, outright buying of land. I think that is probably what needs to be done.
Your expression of upping the ante is very much how I feel about our current efforts in New Jersey. I just think that we need to up the ante because we know that we continue to lose wetlands, and wetlands are impacted with any kind of development when that happens. So yeah, I like that. I like that theme you put out there, is to up the ante for wetland preservation, restoration, etc.
Yeah,
So true.
and there's a lot of groups that are doing wonderful work. DER, the Division of Ecological Restoration, Mass Audubon, trustees of the reservation, a lot of great groups that are, buying up land, preserving land, restoring wetlands back from cranberry bogs to natural ecosystems. I think it's all good. And I also think that what's really good is, and I think it's the future, it's got to be a paradigm shift that we need to look at, embrace, respect, and incorporate those with traditional ecological knowledge. And also look, and I know SWS has been embracing the rights of wetlands, to look at it, and that's a paradigm shift. That's a huge paradigm shift. And I think it actually includes some of the work that, native and indigenous cultures have been doing for ages as climate change is occurring, is that they're paying attention to the changes that are happening ecologically. And they are the people that we need to really add to the knowledge base, to add to our community in terms of the work that we're doing. So, yeah.
Can you just tell me again a little bit about what your current efforts are, the volunteer work that you're involved with post-retirement?
Oh my goodness. I can tell you this. Roy. When I was asked to become president and to put my name out to become president, I thought, oh my goodness, why me? Honestly, I think and it's been the most rewarding experience. I couldn't imagine that I'd be doing the work that I'm doing today with SWS, with the professional certification program. So what am I doing? So we went to Taiwan. We went to Taiwan for the first Asian SWS annual meeting, as you may know, last year. And I was invited to be a symposium, a VIP. That's just so embarrassing to me. See, this is like Asian culture going.
Right.
Symposium speaker, and I got the opportunity to come back to Taiwan after 50 years. I hadn't been to Taiwan in 50 years.
That was your first visit? Was that annual meeting?
Yes.
Good grief. Wow.
Yes. And that was because there were so many life circumstances that affected that. And part of it was cost, to be quite frank. But I went there and I got to connect with family. And it was very sad to me that there were some family members that I had hoped to see, and they had just passed away that spring before the annual meeting. Yeah, it was a very moving experience, but I got to connect with my aunt's children, the one who passed away. And that was wonderful, because we know that now we'll stay connected for life. and it was really wonderful. And then now and in Taiwan, I signed 2 memorandums of cooperation or agreement, one with the Taiwan National Park Service to help their scientists, wetland scientists, become certified, and also with the Ramsar Regional Center for Asia, and that includes working and cooperating with 17 Asian countries that are part of that Ramsar Regional Center to work with their scientists. And then I think, and to present at the annual meeting coming up in Rhode Island on how to become a wetland scientist, certified wetland scientist. And I'll be quite frank, all the people that I have met at SWS, at the professional certification program, are just amazing. They're knowledgeable, they're generous, they're kind. It's like, oh my goodness, I found nirvana in my people. So it's been like, I can't even express how deeply grateful I am to be part of these 2 organizations. And then we're going in July, right after the annual meeting, to the Ramsar Wetlands Convention, COP 15, which is, I don't know if people know that this is a convention of, at this point, 173 countries working together on an international effort to protect and restore and manage all their wetlands of international importance. And the Ramsar Convention 15, which occurs, it's basically, it's COP, it's the Convention of Contracting Parties. And the contracting parties are the countries. We're meeting in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. And I have never been to Africa. And this is just, people have said to me, you're going to be blown away. Africa is magical. And, but to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to meeting all these wonderful people. All these people who have spent their lifetimes and career and sometimes risk their lives to do the work that they do for wetlands.
That trip makes me sounds like it'd be worthy of another wetland interview in and of itself, to share some of what that experience would be.
Yeah.
We have actually gone a little bit over what I would normally do.
Oh, yes.
But when you have something good, you don't want to bring it to conclusion, because you want to keep working with what you've been talking about, because it's been so excellent. And you've been very easy to interview. You didn't really need me here, because you're self-interviewing. Other times it's not always been that pleasurable to try to interview with how that works. So we're coming up in 45 minutes. Normally, the idea is we limit this to 30 minutes. I told you 30 minutes because I thought, well, if I said 45, you'd probably think an hour, and who wants to give an hour for something like this? So I try to limit it to 30 minutes, just in fairness to the person that's being interviewed. I know that we could continue to talk, but unfortunately, we're supposed to limit this to 30 minutes. That's why I'll invite you back after your trip to Africa. One of the things I thought to ask is what you might want to offer or to say to motivate folks, younger folks that are thinking about pursuing a career in wetland science. And I like to always try to include that question, just to leave things on a positive note, because you've had a very successful, beneficial career. What you might want to offer to the young listeners out there to help motivate further interest in wetland science.
Oh, well.
Yeah, where do you start, right?
Where do I start? I think wetland science and the work that those you can do, the potential is actually almost unimaginable, because the work that needs to be done is so important, so essential to saving our planet And quite frankly, we don't have a planet B, and it isn't Mars. Thank you very much. Our planet is the Earth, and the wetlands and the work that you do, if you become a wetland scientist, will be so important. So I would say work on what fundamentally motivates you. And if it's the science, the success and measuring success isn't the accolades or recognition. It's knowing that you're true to yourself. And I know that sounds kind of like, a little mushy, but it's really true.
It's very true, yes.
Knowing what you are and what motivates you, and believe in yourself, because ultimately, like my mother said, you'll know when you did good. So it's a very simple thing.
Nancy, you did very good. Before you said good, I'd rather use the word great with respect to your career. I didn't want to interrupt your flow 40 minutes ago, but you had said, I did good, but you really have you have done great, obviously. And you've been great on this interview. We're now over 45 minutes, but that's how great you are, because you've been so forthcoming and easy to interview. And I certainly appreciate your time today. And I know that you've got a lot of things coming up in the next week.